All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Cloud Cuts with Eon. This is the show where we cut through the noise in cloud backup and we help teams understand how to get more out of your data protection strategy. Today, we're going to be talking about DynamoDB. And by the way, I'm Lior Shai. I'm a solutions architect with Eon, and I'm joined by Mo from AWS. Mo, would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Mo owner. I'm an AWS DynamoDB solutions architect. So I've been using DynamoDB as a customer since 2014, which um, which means I've actually been using DynamoDB longer than I've been a parent. And I love both very much. And yeah, so I'm excited to be here and excited to help our customers make the most of their DynamoDB workload. So hi everybody.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I think first of all, before we get started, please, anybody that's here with us today, feel free to drop any questions in the chat and we'll both answer as we go, or if we don't get a chance to, we'll do a little Q&A at the end. Um, but let's do a little bit of an icebreaker in the meantime. I wonder, did anybody have any favorite announcements at reInvent this week? And if you did, please feel free to share them. And I know Mo and I were there. We had some good times. What was your favorite announcement at reInvent last week?
There were a lot of them. Announcements aside, I actually really appreciate the Eon booth. For those who weren't there, it was a lot of fun. There was a robot dog,
Oh yeah.
which
We call him
which
Eon.
we call him, that's a great name. So Eon was a blast. But in addition, I was a big fan of the database savings plans. I think those are some really cool new feature that's very customer obsessed. It's going to let our customers really not only optimize their costs, but give them the ability to modernize. So where previously maybe you were focused on a relational or an RDS database, and now you want to transition or move over or modernize to a NoSQL database, but you already made a commitment. Now you can use that discount to continue with another database platform. So I think it opens a lot of options for our customers, and saving money is always a good thing. So happy to do that and help our customers reduce their cost and increase their profitability.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, that's great to hear. And I think today what we're going to do is actually talk through DynamoDB, at a kind of foundational level. And then we're going to talk a little bit about protecting your DynamoDB data. So different strategies for both backup and cyber resiliency. But first, Mo, why don't you tell us a little bit about what makes DynamoDB so special and that unique architecture. And then, we'll dive into data protection from there.
Yeah. So there are lots of great database options all over the cloud and especially on AWS. And each one has its various qualities that make it unique. When I think about DynamoDB, I tend to think about, I think it was one of our senior engineers, Amber said, is that um, uh, you have the same reliable, consistent, low latency at any scale. And
Hmm.
so when you think about DynamoDB, you think about scale, right? DynamoDB was built because there was a small bookstore once upon a time called Amazon.com. And they were using, or we were using, a relational database, a standard relational database. And there was an outage, and there was a thought process of, okay, how can we continue to scale this data? It's much more complex in the world of relational databases. Sorry to take the tangent, but one of my favorite jokes is you see a cloud engineer shows up in the desert and finds a magic lamp. The cloud engineer rubs the magic lamp out, comes a genie, and the genie says, "I can grant you any wish you want, but I cannot grant you more wishes." And the cloud engineer says, "Okay, I want more lamps." And the idea of cloud scaling and
Hmm.
scaling horizontally was born. And Amazon wrote something called the Dynamo paper, later to be what came about to be DynamoDB. And DynamoDB is built to handle that exabyte scale, that scale that Amazon.com currently relies on. During Prime Day, I think there were 151 million requests per second, which is really big. And DynamoDB can give you that single digit millisecond latency at any scale. And I don't just say a huge scale. at small scale too. So if you're looking for, say, a place to store some small metadata or something to store a huge amount of data, DynamoDB can do that, and all within being as serverless. So there's no
Mm,
patching that you have to worry about. It's scaling for you. So there's really low operational overhead, which makes it a really good database for, OLTP when I need quick responses. I don't want to worry about patching and database management. DynamoDB could be a great option. It comes with a lot of other features as well. So things like DynamoDB streams. There are backup options, which we'll discuss as well. Zero ETL, TTL. The list goes on.
hmm.
Including, by the way, global tables, also a
Yeah,
wonderful feature. Um, so yeah, so there's
absolutely.
a lot of things. I think in the end of the day, though, when we ask ourselves what database we choose, I think the
Mm,
magic word is trade-offs. We need to understand
hmm.
what we're looking for as engineers. We need to go back to what are our needs, and from understanding what our needs, then we can address and find a good solution. So it's hard to say that there's one database to solve all problems, but we need to understand the problem before we can understand what we need to solve.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the things just hearing you talk about, DynamoDB foundations like that, if we think about what we see at our customers, because you could imagine, we deal with a lot of large AWS customers that are trying to protect thousands and thousands of resources across hundreds of accounts. And what we see is huge adoption of DynamoDB in a very varied set of use cases. So a lot of enterprises' most critical applications are backed by DynamoDB, but it's could be for a really really high scale use case with a really complex data model, or it could just be for storing some configuration data. But one of the things that we see is a lot of organizations definitely depend on it, and it's kind of something that we already assume is going to be there and going to be durable. So in that sense, one of the things I think it'll be great to talk about here is what are some of the core kind of data protection features that are available out of the box for DynamoDB. Obviously,
Mhm.
we help customers kind of protect it at scale, and we'll talk about what Eon does in that area. But what's available to customers that are looking to protect their tables today?
It's a really important question, especially because when we take a step back to understand why data protection is so critical, in the days of Gen AI that we exist in now, any customer or any entity really has access to almost any LLM, whether it's a Nova model, a Claude model, a GPT model, or a Gemini model. Our customers have access to those models in some capacity or another. The differentiator for our customers is going to be the data, whether that's something like RAG or adding it to their prompt engineering. Their data is what helps them differentiate themselves in the market, making your data one of the most critical aspects in the world of AI. And so data protection is very important. The DynamoDB team has said that they have four focuses, four, we call them tenets at AWS.
Mhm.
And when it comes to the world of Dynamo, it's security, durability, availability, and predictable low latency. And those are critical to the world of DynamoDB and to the offering that we give to customers. And so within that world and security, you're going to have encryption at rest and you're going to have encryption in transit with your own KMS keys. But in the world of durability, specifically there are various options you have for backing up. So
Mhm.
again, moving just zooming out for a second, as engineers, we need to ask ourselves, what is our goal? Why do we want to back up our data? In what capacity? There are solutions like point in time recovery, where you're going to get 35 days of history in DynamoDB with second level granularity. So if you have something like maybe you're concerned about data corruption, so you want to revert to 3 days ago at this exact second, you can restore an entire table to that point in time. Maybe for compliance reasons, you want to take a snapshot of your database daily. You can do that as well. Save it within AWS backups. Maybe you want to export your data to S3 because you want it in that kind of storage. Maybe with the option to also do something else with that data in some kind of ETL. So you have that option as well, including incremental backups to S3. So you don't just do one big data dump. You have streams, so you can build your own way to do it. You even have multi-region tables. So you could say, hey, just in case this region is going to give me a problem, I'll have access to my data in another region. So there are a lot of options. And often the correct answer is to use a combination of these in order to get what you need. It's not a, it's a multiple answer.
Hmm.
It's a multiple answer type of thing. But I will give this one interesting note, which is that I worked with a lot of customers around optimizing the durability of DynamoDB and their operations and what they're doing on a day-to-day in their production databases. One thing that I do see our customers frequently overlooking is a feature called deletion protection, where you can go ahead and put like a safety switch, if you will, on the table. So if somebody, possibly by accident, maybe you have an MCP server that got a little too wild and did something it might not have supposed to have done and tries to call the delete table API, they'll need to first disable deletion protection. It's a free feature right off the bat, and if you have critical production data, that's something that you should have enabled because deleting a table is you can be a very painful, irreversible step. So that's one thing that I would definitely recommend if you're using DynamoDB in production and it's not enabled.
There's the saying, a delete is a delete, right? Once
Right.
you delete it, yeah, you better hope you have either a backup or something, but deletion protection is definitely something we want to have across
Yeah,
the board. I agree with you.
for sure.
Um, I think this brings up something that's really interesting here, which is, if I'm looking at this, let's say I'm, working in an enterprise on a cloud IT or infrastructure team, and I'm tasked with kind of saying, are all of my, forget about all AWS resources, that's hard enough, but are all of my DynamoDB tables adequately protected? One thing that becomes really challenging that we see is, right, there's all these options available and kind of how do I know which one I need for different different tiered applications or for different environments, if it's production or non-production or different types of data. And that's why I think one of the areas that I'd be interesting to discuss with you is I think with the Eon's approach to data protection, we're kind of taking a lot of these capabilities that AWS is offering to customers, and we're kind of helping customers scale that out and roll those out in a controlled manner. And so that's one of the things that we're seeing that's really interesting is we have a lot of customers that are really, really happy about all these different ways that they have, first of all, to use DynamoDB, but also to protect it. Um, but really it's kind of saying, that's great. How can I make sure I roll this out effectively to thousands of tables across hundreds of AWS accounts? And that's kind of where we've been coming in and working with our DynamoDB protection. Um,
Yeah.
One thing that's been really interesting as well, like you mentioned the idea of using incremental export to S3, let's say to do some kind of transformation and maybe analytics on data that exists in a table. Another thing that's interesting that we'll take a look at as well is with the way that Eon is processing backups for DynamoDB tables, we're actually, as part of the backup process, creating incremental snapshots of the DynamoDB table that can actually be queried, right? So I think we've talked about this. That's a workflow that we've seen customers do themselves on AWS. And so actually in Eon, your backups are queryable with Eon with Athena by default. So you can run Presto style queries on your actual DynamoDB tables. And we do that by actually inferring a schema. So um, we're going to take a look at that as an example, but I'm wondering, and any other type of, you mentioned being able to restore tables from point in time recovery to a specific point in time for a full table restoration. We can look at that as well, but also this idea of policy enforcement. I know, Mo, as far as from your perspective, if a company needs to or an enterprise needs to roll a consistent backup policy across an entire organization, is that something that is possible to do? I guess we think about using an AWS backup for that
Yeah.
aspect. Mhm.
So you do have that option with AWS backup, and it is built in with your vault, allowing you to you send your backups to various accounts in various regions. So you can enable that. But to touch on something else that you said, Lior, is you
Mhm.
mentioned this idea of being able to take my data that exists in DynamoDB and maybe query it in more of a data lake-like format. And I think for customers, that's that I've at least customers I've spoken to, that's a really unique value because and a great value because our customers really appreciate using DynamoDB for that low latency, that predictable low latency. But
Mhm.
in order to get that, you're gonna be taking your data and you're gonna be setting it for your access patterns. And if, a couple weeks later, someone from the analytics team says, "Hey, I want to view the data in this capacity with some aggregation or a different type of where clause." On Dynamo, you can do that, but that might infer a full table scan, which could be
Mhm.
quite expensive, and not as effective. And so having the ability to use my data in an OLAP type of fashion, as opposed, right, an online analytics processing fashion, as opposed to an OLTP, a transactional fashion that Dynamo is really used for by by majority of our customers. It's it's a great value, another way to help you use your data, especially if if my data exists in Eon, both for backup reasons and it exists in a way for me to leverage that data, for me to analyze it, another way for me to look at it, uh, the ability to put on a different pair of glasses to see the data differently, is going to help me as a customer, as a user of Eon, extract a lot of value. Now, Dynamo does offer some things like that, so you're going to be able to use zero ETL,
Mhm.
but it's really nice that Eon gives you that feature as well. So your data is there, and you can use it both as backup and as analytics processing. I think that's a great feature.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thanks for that. And let's take a look. We can see an example of that. And just to point out, Mo, what you're talking about there, being able to actually access the backup data in any way, right, using SQL-like queries. And again, make it clear, right? It's not you're not getting that same type of low latency that you would be expecting or even require, right, for a production application that's leveraging DynamoDB for that purpose. But what you can do is ask questions of the data in essentially any way that you could think of. And on top of that, right, it opens up the possibility for use cases like audit, right? If you needed to do some type of investigation on the data that exists at a table, or if you wanted to, for debugging purposes, to go back to a historical version of the table, but you didn't want to wait to recover the full table itself. And then another way that we've seen is, let's say, as you do in DynamoDB, you kind of ahead of time create a certain data model that's designed to be accessed in a particular way. But as a developer, you're curious about, what if? Like, what if I could sort by this attribute that's not actually indexed? And so in some ways, right, Eon might allow you to do that from your backups instead of actually needing to create an index on that attribute. So let's take a look at a demo. I actually have a pre-recorded quick demo to show you that that feature. And what we'll do is we'll actually jump in and look at what Eon looks like overall as a solution. So we see here, right, our Eon dashboard and our actual Eon inventory, where we discover AWS resources, and then if they're protected by a backup policy, they're actually going to have regular snapshots taken. So looking at a DynamoDB table as an example, right, this one we have snapshots being taken every half an hour. And I can do a regular restoration of the full table, much like you'd expect. I can choose which account, which encryption settings. But what I could also do here is actually go ahead and explore database using our database explorer functionality, where actually I can see here an inferred schema. So what that means is Eon, as it's processing the backup, is actually allowing you to query by attributes present in that table. So I can choose a particular snapshot and then actually see here, right at that point in time, I can use a SQL query, and this is using Athena under the hood. So this is actually being written into an S3 bucket in a restore target. And this actual query here is letting me use also the partition and sort key, like you can imagine, as well as any arbitrary attribute. So in this case, I'm sorting by, duration minutes descending,
Mm.
and I could use another one if I wanted to, right? So I can even go and write a query here using visit time and sort by the ones that the most recent visit times in this particular case. And so the thing that's interesting here is if we go into the AWS console and actually look at this particular table, I can see I'm able to run this query and do this on visit time, even though I don't have any GSI created, right? If I look at the indexes on this table, nothing there. But sure enough, I'm able to actually run, this SQL query. For demo purposes, right, we see the preview of the results here, but these actually get sent into S3 and CSV format. And what that enables us to do is create even automated workflows. So you could use our API to run this using a CI/CD pipeline programmatically. And actually, Mo, to your point before, what you just kind of hinted at is we actually announced at reInvent an integration with Redshift that allows you not just to ask questions to a single DynamoDB table, but you can also actually do joins between a backup of a DynamoDB table and a backup of an RDS database, for example. So all those database backups in Eon are actually going to be queryable and indexed and allow you to ask questions of the data, assuming you provision the permissions, right, to allow for that. And that's something that a lot of our customers are really excited about because essentially what it means is they're backing up the data and protecting it and then enabling all different types of use cases, like even AI ones, right? Like an MCP type of use case as well.
Yeah, I think, when I have the opportunity to speak to customers a lot of times we start with the conversation of what is the database that I want for my workload? What is
Mhm.
the right choice? And what's interesting is it's not just like the backup options we talked about before, it's not a one-to-one. A lot of times we explain to customers, even if you're working in a microservice type of architecture, we say, oh, my microservice, my Kubernetes pods or whatnot, they just need to speak to one database. And a lot of times the answer is no, there could be multiple databases, even at that level of a microservice. A classic case that we might think about or see is maybe you have some type of in-memory database to cache, like I don't know, Valky with Elasticache to
Mhm.
cache your core source of data. Maybe you want to be able to use an open search cluster or endpoint in order to get more advanced semantic or similarity search, and you're using Dynamo with zero ETL to keep it updated. Um, so our customers are more and more often choosing multiple databases for whatever needs they have. And I know the two examples I gave is when the data is maybe replicated, but even so, there could be data that says, hey, this data is really in a key val with clear access patterns. It makes a lot of sense at its scale and how we need to put in NoSQL. And this is maybe I don't have such clear access patterns. My scale isn't, exabyte scale, and I need to do very complex joins. Maybe that belongs in an RDS, this subset of data. And to join them within those data engines is something that's, well, it's impossible to do at that level. You would have to build something in the application layer, which could also be expensive. So to have something like what you said, Lior, where Eon is going to allow you to take those two data sources from an analytics perspective and join them together, I think is also a great feature for our customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, right, it's kind of enabling you something that you can do today anyway, but it's one of those things where if the customer is going to be, transferring that data, making a copy of that data as a backup anyway, why not get, that additional analytics capability out of it too? And I think that's something that we've been seeing a lot of enthusiasm about. And I would say, Mo, from what I'm hearing from you, my takeaway from this is we think about DynamoDB as a service, obviously, you know, out of the box, basically infinite scale, right? Virtually. And when it's configured right, you're essentially talking about a very, very durable solution. You mentioned deletion protection, point in time recovery, the different functionality. And I think from our perspective too, what we see with customers is even though there's customers that might find themselves when they start adopting DynamoDB with thousands and thousands of tables and maybe issues kind of getting a handle on which ones are critical, which ones are for production, which ones are a certain tier of application. With a tool like Eon, we're helping those enterprises roll out, a consistent backup solution that meets with all their compliant requirements and where they can actually report on whether or not they're meeting the mark on data protection on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I think that we've seen, and I think, what do you think as far as your takeaway
No,
and when it comes to protecting DynamoDB?
I think it's very important. I think our CTO, Dr. Werner Vogels, has famously said everything fails all the time. And that's become the idea of cloud computing. It's become what we as cloud engineers think about constantly. But he frequently doesn't have the second part of the quote, which is, so if you plan to fail, essentially you can't. And what I would recommend, or I do recommend to our customers, is especially if you have a large DynamoDB workload in production. But if you have any database workload in production, if you have anything, especially with state, you should make sure that you know what are my RTO, my recovery time objective. How quickly do I need to be back live after maybe a large scale outage? What are my RPO, my recovery? What is my RPO, my recovery point objective? At what point do I want to make sure that my data is updated until if I do have a system failure?
Hmm.
These are the questions we engineers, cloud engineers, to ask themselves in order to choose the right backup and the right high availability, or we call it disaster recovery scenario. But even more important than designing it is practicing it. We've unfortunately we've all gotten these calls at 2 or 3 in the morning where our pager duty or whatnot goes off, and we're groggy. Maybe we'll even start brewing a cup of coffee, but it's not ready yet, and production is down. And now in this state, we kind of have to figure out what's wrong, and things aren't clear, and we're trying to figure it out. We're getting on a Zoom call, practicing these things,
Hmm.
practicing doing a restore. How long is it going to take me to do a restore? That's an incredibly important piece of information. Do I have a playbook for my operations team? Do I, as the engineer on call, have simply the permissions necessary to do that restore? These are critical things that a fire drill, if you will help understand. And I highly recommend that customers, even monthly or if possible more often, do that fire drill to understand what happens, so that if heaven forbid at 2 a.m. you do get that call and you realize you need to do it, it's going to be second nature to you. So I think that it's very important to not only have your data in production ready to be accessed in the ways you want, but have it backed up and have a plan. Understand where it is, because like I said, if you don't have that plan, it's great that your data is backed up, but you're gonna have a bad day when the bad day comes. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah, no,
yeah,
that's a really, really great point. I think, like you said, backup is just one half of data protection, right? You also need to be really, really intentional about the recovery and the restore. And I think one thing that we're going to do to close out is we're going to look at some Q&A that we have here from the audience. So we'll just do a couple of questions because we're coming up on half an hour. So the first one, Mo, I think that this is one that I think it'll be great to hear from you about. How do customers, or what can customers do to avoid runaway costs in DynamoDB?
it's a fair question. There are various things you can do to avoid that concept of runaway costs, right? Where all of a sudden I look at my bill and, hey, why is the cost for DynamoDB so high? So we could talk about proactive, right? Like we announced the database savings plan and proper throughput, but I want to focus more on reactive. Okay. What just happened? So the first thing you want to understand is why did it happen? Now you could put in some proactive things, like you can put in a billing alert to watch that. If you're using on-demand throughput, you can declare the maximum. So if for whatever reason there is some kind of runaway service, or maybe some bad for loop that just goes and starts doing a lot to your database, you can say, hey, I'm gonna max out here, and right now I'd rather get throttled on my table and freeze this workload than get a very large bill, as well. And I think most importantly, um, again, being reactive, understanding it. But after we're reactive, I guess if we go back to proactive for a moment, the best thing you can do is try to understand how you're accessing your data. A lot of times customers come from the world of, well, I'm in a relational model and this is how I want to have things done and this is how I expect my data to be modeled. But in
Mm,
DynamoDB, you want to create your data in a way that it could be read effectively, quickly, cost effectively. There's actually a wonderful tool called the DynamoDB MCP server. Take a look it up, and it's going to help you take a look at your data model and ask you critical questions to help arrange your data modeling in DynamoDB to be cost effective at the scale you need it to be. And I found with a lot of customers who said, hey, I'm doing X writes and Y reads. And we were able to reduce those to something more like in the O of one category, which not only helped with cost, it also helped with performance. So those proactive things can be very helpful. Um, as well as take a look at Cost Explorer, understand why it's happening, and uh, reach out to me or to any, reach out to your AWS account team. We're here to help um, through whatever it is. So um, if you're joining us, my here I'll put my email here in the chat for those of us who are with us. But as well, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Always happy to help. That is literally my job, and it's also my passion. So
That's
yeah.
awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah. And we'll just round it with one last one. So somebody has, how does the Eon granular query functionality work? And there's another question asking if you can join DynamoDB backups with other Eon backups. So we'll answer kind of both of those. One of the things is, if you notice, the way that Eon is actually going and taking these backups of AWS resources is it's not kind of going and doing a standard snapshot, right? Or like a layer on top of the regular AWS API for snapshots. It's actually going and ingesting the data from the database and actually processing an incremental snapshot on Eon, where the data is actually indexed, it's stored in S3 on object storage, and is actually queryable. And one of the benefits of that is it can be queried using Athena. So you can use, Presto style queries to ask questions about the data. But what we've also done is released a Redshift integration. So actually, you can integrate if you have existing flows, right, using Redshift and external, S3 data sources. You can actually connect to your Eon backups and look at your data not just from the perspective of one DynamoDB table, but multiple tables, or even multiple different types of databases, which Mo, we were just discussing before. And the thing that I'll mention is a lot of customers kind of ask about that. How is that possible? Is it different? And really, the way that it works is when a backup is taken of a DynamoDB table, we're actually inferring a schema from the data. So even if there's an attribute where there's no index for that attribute, you can actually sort by it and write, where clauses using it and do joins and all kinds of stuff like that. So anybody that's interested in hearing in general about, Eon backups or DynamoDB, please, do. I know that Mo means it when he says reach out to him and, reach out to us as well. And also, if you didn't get a chance, anybody in the audience to see the DynamoDB Day, so Eon and AWS together, we had a DynamoDB Day event, and we have recordings for all of those in the chat. So thank you everybody for joining us. This has been really great, and yeah, have a great day until next time. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Take care.